Hi there guys, so yeah, this is a video response to Lombor's post 1975 on his stance on emulation. And I have been using emulation ever since the early Spectrum or Commodore 64 days actually. So in the early 80s or halfway the 80s, I became aware of a program that came on tape, and it was by WinUAE Computers Limited, and it came on tape, and it came with a reference card, and it actually allowed you to run basic programs intended for the ZX Spectrum um, in such a way that you could actually have a Spectrum tape with screen files and basic programs. You could actually load that in the Commodore tape drive and just load in the basic program. It had a compatible interpreter, and it used different tape loading routines. So basically, it mimicked the Spectrum, and it didn't necessarily mimic a Spectrum 48K, but actually it has 16K ZX Spectrum. So where can you find that emulator? Well, it's still online, and you can actually download it. Worldofspectrum.org, FAQ, emulators, miscellaneous, HTM. And then if you click on this, you'll get a PRO file, or a zip file that contains a PRO file, and that is actually a binary file that you can run directly in Commodore 64 emulators on the PC or on any other platform, or you can actually transfer it to a real disk or a tape and run it on the real hardware. Well, it's about emulation, so I'm going to show it on the Commodore 64 emulator. Let's reset that and get rid of that of this. So basically, this is the Commodore 64 emulator Vice. This is not the first Commodore 64 emulator I ever used, but this is Vice to show you the first emulator that I actually used ever, and that is this version of the WinUAE Computers Limited Spectrum emulation. So auto start disk image and then the PRO attach. Well, this is what it looked like. It came on tape back in the day, and this still is the same. Basically, this gives you a 16K basic Spectrum software. There's no emulation of the Z80 processor. It does the beeper. It does quite a few peeks and pokes. You can actually modify the character set, which also worked with peeks and pokes. So a lot of the peeks and pokes actually worked, but not the real machine. It wasn't a real machine that was emulated, but it was a pretty good thing because a lot of the software my friend was actually writing in BASIC actually ran on the Commodore 64, albeit at a slower speed because the Z80 from the Spectrum and the C64's 6510 CPU were very different in speed, and the emulator was pretty good, but the basic programs didn't run as fast as on the real Spectrum. You could use Spectrum tapes. You could actually do microdrive through the disk drive. It was an emulation of the microdrive, but you were able to directly load and save on a Spectrum tape. So you could actually do some cross-platform developing, which me and my friend actually were doing. I think Mr. Costardo Aaron actually remembers. He programmed the demo on the C64, and I programmed the demo on the Spectrum with this emulator. And yeah, let's show you what it looks like. So this is actually what it looks like when you fire it up. And on the Spectrum, all the keys, all the rubber keys had key code. So you didn't have to use the complete keyboard to type in all the exact basic commands. So typing in a basic program could actually be a lot faster, and you were less inclined to make errors typing the commands because that was done for you. On a Spectrum, if you power it on, you get a nice, you have that black screen with the red stripes going up and down, well, you don't have it when you turn on the system. It just flashes like this. But if you press, and of course the copyright information is different, but if you press A, which is also new, and you see it looks like a Spectrum, you can type in a simple basic program. So let's type in 10, and you really have to know, and it came with a reference card, but you really have to know where the basic commands were located on the keyboard, on the Commodore 64 keyboard, of course, and you really had to know the editor, the Spectrum editor, which is a bit different because the flashing cursor has now a K in it, which means that it is ready to accept keywords, basic keywords, and not free type text. So the P is for print, and then letters or anything. So. And now it says L for letters. So you can do free typing. So this is running on an emulated emulated C64 instead of on a real Spectrum with a space and then go to 10. So this is a forever looping little program. And if you type the R, which is on a real Spectrum, it is a run, and it'll just go on, and it asks you to scroll. There's actually a poke on the Spectrum that removes that, or a command that removes that, but if you press yes, it'll just scroll until the next screen is filled. And as you can see, on a real Spectrum, this would run a lot faster than on the Commodore 64. But I mean, it was a nice way of some cross-platform developing. Break, you can press break, and you can do new, and the whole thing is gone. You could actually save it. Print hello world, and you could actually save that. Hello world. Well, you see it's a bit different on a Spectrum than on a Commodore 64, but yeah, you could actually I mean screen files you on basic on game tapes, Spectrum game tapes. Most of the time they would have a basic program that actually loaded in a screen, and then it loaded in the machine code, and then it started running. And actually a lot of the ZX Spectrum tapes would actually appear to work. You could, have a hold up a ZX Spectrum tape. I think Wave Exploding Fist actually worked as well. I mean the loading part. Up till the machine code would interfere, and it would give an option that this program cannot be executed, blah blah blah. So random user and then a number, and all that jazz won't work with the thing. I would love to be able to show this on a real Commodore 64. I may actually be able to show it using my camera. Not sure if I'm going to do it, but yeah, I've been a huge I've been a huge fan of emulation, because I really grasped the concept of code running independently of machines. Because back in the day when I started to use computers, I would help out in the library, and there would be tons of computers: Apple II, TRS-80, Commodore 64, VIC-20, MSX machines, and they all had their own variant of BASIC, or even other programming languages. They had their proprietary disk formats, tape formats. Nothing was interchangeable. So, and even BASIC, they all had their specific dialects. So nothing was standardized. Perhaps only the joystick controller ports, the Atari 8 or 9-pin controller joystick ports, pretty much became a standard. That was actually the first type of standard ever, I guess, in the computer world. And the fact that audio tapes could be used, but they all saved in different baud rates and different encoding and stuff. So basically you were toast. If you wanted to use more than, well, all the software available, you had to use a ton of different computers. Now it's PC, Mac, Linux, basically, or ARM, Android. and that's it. You know, the world has become a lot more simpler, and at the same time, it was very cool. It was very cool it was very cool to emulate other systems when that became available. And the international emulation system, you know, when with the advent, with the onset of the World Wide Web, emulation became more dominant. I studied in Leiden, and in Leiden there was actually a guy, Marcel de Kogel, who was also studying in Leiden, and he was programming a lot of stuff, a lot of Z80 processor kind of related stuff, MSX emulation, Z80 emulation, and I myself actually programmed in Turbo Pascal. I did a 6510 CPU emulation that it everything, you know, with the registers and all that kind of stuff. It actually ran code. It did some memory management, and that's it. I mean, I could run code, but it would just do that, and it would not be a complete system that was being emulated. But I understand the concept of, you know, bogging on pieces of code that actually do the memory management, that mimic the BIOS from the certain systems and stuff. And I would actually debug emulators and give feedback and stuff. So the whole concept of and the World Wide Web actually contributed to that all these different computers, be it a VAX machine or a Sun machine or a basic Commodore or an old PC, with modems and stuff, and bulletin boards with modems, FidoNet, computers would be able to talk to each other. Information was interchangeable, was exchangeable, and actual programs would be OS or computer specific. But that kind of went away with the onset of emulators, and there's a ton of great emulators and a ton of great sites. I mean, basically the local internet, the local network of Leiden University housed a whole plethora of emulator files that ran on Linux, were developed on Linux, but also on MS-DOS. Murat Faisalin, who was writing MSX, he may have collaborated with Marcel de Kogel. There's Mia Peternel, he did C64 emulation, machine code, which was pretty good. You had PC64, which was a German, which was a emulator developed by a German. The thing is, emulators need to be cycle exact to be completely able to work exactly like the entire machine itself would work. For example, the Spectrum 48K emulator is not necessarily an emulator, it's more or less a simulator. And let me see if I can just, okay, perhaps that's less, the Spectrum emulator that I just showed you actually was not an emulator, but more of a simulator. But in a way, it actually was an emulator. But a real emulator would actually emulate the CPU and all the other chips that would be found in the computer system and the way they interacted. And memory management, you would be able to load in a program that was actually intended for a different system. You know, you had to convert files. Most of the times they were named ROM files, or you could just load in the real thing because, you know, the computer was able to understand the same input that would be housed in memory as variables in a program, and the program would actually, you know, put that in a virtual machine. Basically, virtual machines are a form of emulation. And in DOS, you only had DOS, so basically there was no virtual machine, but the program took over the complete machine and allowed the whole PC or whole computer system to act like the old system. You had Commodore 64, Spectrum emulation, MSX emulation. Basically, those types of emulation became more well, mainstream, I guess, in the early 90s. Of course, Linux, VAX emulation. In the Linux world, in the university Linux world environment, IT environment, emulation or cross-platform compilers and that kind of stuff became was actually quite normal. So emulation isn't a bad thing. It's actually being able to use software that was meant for an other system on a newer system and just have the code and the thoughts and the ideas put into those programs maintain the availability and the usability. So I think when emulators became moved into the area of moved into the era of home computer systems that play games, then there were these legal things. I know people were pirating games and they would be pirating them on the emulators and stuff. So yeah, that kind of thing, you know, that's the legal thing, the legal issue. But basically an emulator itself isn't illegal. And then there's the thing, how do you implement it? You could actually use the BIOS or the real machine code that was in the machine. You could rip it out and the BIOS and simulate that and do it that way. Or you could reverse engineer it and you just basically start from scratch and emulate the entire system yourself, reverse engineering it. Using the copyrighted BIOS code, you run into emulation, or you run into copyright issues again, unless it's, you know, abandonware, freeware, or something. But yeah, I'm babbling. I mean, for people who are well versed into the emulation thing, this probably is, you know, they understand, but it may not be as understandable for all. Yeah. Let me see if this is actually intelligible, whatever.